It was a late Friday evening, and I had just gotten home from work. Eager to unwind, I settled on the couch with a hot cup of tea and a classic horror movie. Outside, a fierce storm was brewing, with rain pounding against the windows and occasional thunder rumbling in the distance. I had the window curtains slightly open, hoping to catch a glimpse of any spectacular lightning. Stormy nights were rare in my town, and I always found them thrilling. As the movie reached a particularly tense scene, I glanced outside and noticed a figure moving down the sidewalk. It was a man, drenched from head to toe, with no umbrella or raincoat. He walked with purpose, eventually stopping at one of the houses across the street. He stood on the porch for a moment, seemingly waiting for someone to answer the door. After a few minutes, he turned and continued down the street, disappearing into the darkness. The sight of him unsettled me. Who wanders around in a storm at midnight, stopping at random houses? A sense of unease washed over me. I closed the curtains fully, not wanting to draw any attention to myself. The man's behavior was odd, to say the least, and I didn't want to take any chances. 15 minutes later, I heard a faint noise outside my own house. My heart rate spiked as I realized someone was walking up my driveway. The sound of footsteps approached my front door, but there was no knock or doorbell. Instead, I heard shuffling movements around my porch, followed by footsteps near the side windows. Panic set in. I wanted to peek through the peephole, but feared making any noise that might alert the stranger to my presence. I held my breath, listening intently. After a minute, the sound ceased. Gathering my courage, I tiptoed to the door and looked through the peephole. There he was, the same man from earlier, standing at the edge of my porch, staring at the door with a blank expression. I backed away, my heart pounding. This was getting too creepy. I needed to call the police. I reached for my phone, but just as I was about to dial, I heard the sound of footsteps retreating. I peeked out again. The man was gone. Even though he had left, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. I called the police, explaining what had happened. They assured me they would send an officer to patrol the neighborhood and check things out. Relieved, I thanked them and hung up. Trying to relax, I returned to the couch, but the evening's events had drained me. I turned off the TV and decided to go to bed. As I climbed into bed and switched off the lights, a loud thud echoed from downstairs. I sat up, heart racing. The sound came again, louder this time, like someone was trying to force their way in. I jumped out of bed and hurried to the top of the stairs. Peering down, I saw the front door shaking violently with each hit. Someone was trying to break it down. Panic surged through me as I realized the door wouldn't hold much longer. I ran back to my bedroom, locked the door, and called 911 again. The operator assured me an officer was already in the neighborhood and would be there in less than a minute. As I spoke to the dispatcher, I heard the door downstairs finally give way, crashing to the floor. Heavy footsteps pounded through the house as the intruder moved from room to room. Each second felt like an eternity. The footsteps grew louder, heading up the stairs. My mind raced, imagining the worst. Suddenly, I heard a shout from downstairs. The police had arrived. The intruder's footsteps stopped abruptly, followed by a scramble towards the back door. The officer stormed in, yelling commands. Unable to escape, the intruder was apprehended and led out in handcuffs. From my window, I could see the man more clearly now. He had a wild look in his eyes and remained silent, refusing to answer any questions. The police found a large hammer and several lengths of rope in his pockets, indicating his malicious intent. After the police left, I sat in my bedroom shaken. The officer who stayed behind to take my statement reassured me that calling 911 earlier had likely saved my life. Had the police not been patrolling the area, the intruder might have succeeded in his terrifying plan. The officer also mentioned that they had received several reports of a suspicious person in the neighborhood, matching the man's description. It was a reminder of how quickly things can turn dangerous and how important it is to trust your instincts. In the aftermath, I installed additional security measures, including a more robust door and a surveillance camera. That night changed my perspective on safety forever. While I tried to return to my normal routine, the memory of those footsteps in the dark and the terrifying realization of how close I had come to harm lingered in my mind. It was a night I would never forget. Last spring, during a particularly rainy month, I found myself working late shifts, delivering food for a popular local restaurant. The rain seemed endless, with constant drizzles or intense storms making my job more challenging. I had to navigate slick roads and dodge puddles while rushing orders to customers who were safely tucked inside their homes. It was a Friday night, and I started my shift at 6 p.m. The evening had been busy, and around 9 p.m. I received an order that took me to the outskirts of town. This part of the town was more rural, with houses spread far apart and roads winding through dense clusters of trees. The rain was coming down hard, and the visibility was poor. As I drove deeper into the woods, I noticed there were only a few cars on the road. One particular car had been trailing me for a while, maintaining a steady distance. After a few miles, something unexpected happened. Headlights appeared out of nowhere, illuminating a car that was blocking the road ahead. The car had swerved to a stop, now positioned sideways and obstructing my path. I hit the brakes, my tires skidding on the wet pavement. The car behind me did the same, stopping just inches from my bumper. My heart raced as I tried to process what was happening. The car blocking the road was an old, beat-up sedan with its high beams blinding me. I couldn't see who was inside. It was odd and unsettling. It felt deliberate. The driver behind me, clearly frustrated, laid on their horn. The sound blared through the rain-soaked night, but the car in front didn't budge. Eventually, the driver behind me stepped out. He was a large man, visibly angry, and he marched through the rain toward the obstructing vehicle. He pounded on their window, shouting angrily. I couldn't hear much over the rain, but his body language was aggressive. Suddenly, the man froze. He slowly backed away from the car, a look of fear replacing his anger. He hurried back to his vehicle without saying a word. My anxiety skyrocketed as the driver's side door of the beat-up sedan opened, and a man stepped out. He wore a heavy dark coat, and his face was obscured by the hood. The hooded man moved purposefully toward the car behind me. The large man, now back in his car, panicked and tried to reverse, but his tires spun on the wet road. The car fishtailed before it finally gained traction and sped off, veering off the road and crashing into the trees. I was trapped. My mind raced as I watched the hooded man turn and start walking towards my car. Desperation took over. I threw my car into reverse and floored the gas, praying I wouldn't lose control. I managed to back up far enough to turn around, then sped off, not daring to look back. Shaking, I called the police as soon as I felt safe. I explained everything, my voice trembling. They assured me they would send officers to check the area. About 20 minutes later, I received a call from the police. They found the car crashed into the trees. But the hooded man and the large man were both gone. The scene was eerily quiet, with no signs of a struggle or any indication of what had happened. Days passed, and I couldn't shake the memory of that night. I kept replaying the events in my mind, trying to make sense of it. The police investigated, but without any leads or further incidents, the case remained a mystery. They suggested it might have been a carjacking gone wrong, but there were too many unanswered questions. I eventually installed a dash cam and extra security measures for my car. The experience left me wary of night deliveries, especially in remote areas. Every time I pass by that part of town, I can't help but feel a chill run down my spine, remembering the hooded figure and the inexplicable fear in that man's eyes. The rainy night, the obstructed road, and the ominous presence of that hooded stranger will forever be etched in my memory. A haunting reminder of the dangers that can lurk in the most unexpected places. I work as a mechanic for a car shop in my town. It's a family-owned business that's been around for decades, operating out of an old industrial building on the edge of town. The shop's yard, which we call the junkyard, is filled with cars in various states of disrepair, either waiting for parts or being scavenged for usable pieces. My job for the past 2 years has been managing the inventory and ordering parts, a role that naturally fits into the quieter overnight hours. This means I also double as a sort of night watchman, given that we've had problems with trespassers trying to steal parts or vandalize the property. One particular night, I arrived at the shop around 8 p.m. After a brief chat with my boss, who handed me the keys and the day's paperwork, I was left alone in the warehouse. The rain outside was coming down hard, creating a constant drumming on the metal roof that was both noisy and oddly soothing. I settled into my usual routine of reviewing the orders left by the day shift and checking what parts had been used. There were a couple of special orders that caught my eye, requiring specific parts for repairs. One request was incomplete. The mechanic hadn't noted the year of the car, a crucial detail for ordering the right part. The car in question was a silver Toyota Camry. I looked around the warehouse but couldn't spot it. Realizing it must be in the junkyard, I sighed. Of course, it had to be on a night like this. I took a short break for coffee, then grabbed my raincoat and flashlight. Stepping outside, the rain was heavier than before, and visibility was low. I made my way across the yard, flashlight beam dancing over the rows of cars. About halfway through the yard, I saw a flicker of movement near an old pickup truck. It was quick, just at the edge of my vision. My heart skipped a beat. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The rain swallowed my voice. I took a few cautious steps forward, shining my flashlight in the direction of the movement. There was no response and no further movement. After a tense moment, I continued toward the Camry, constantly glancing around. When I reached the car, I quickly noted the model year and turned back toward the warehouse, moving faster now. The rain was cold and relentless, and my nerves were on edge. As I neared the building, I thought I heard a faint rustling behind me. I paused and turned, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Back inside, I shook off my raincoat and sat down to complete the order. The incident outside still lingered in my mind, but I pushed it aside. I spent the next hour or so finishing up paperwork and organizing the inventory list. Around 1 a.m., it was time to do the stock count in the warehouse itself. I walked along the rows of shelves, checking what parts were low and needed reordering. The warehouse was dimly lit and filled with shadows that seemed to move with the flickering fluorescent lights. As I moved down the third aisle, a loud thud echoed through the building, and suddenly, the lights went out. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. In the pitch black, I strained my ears and heard it. Footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, coming from somewhere deeper in the warehouse. I quickly turned on my phone's flashlight, but it offered little comfort against the oppressive darkness. I didn't dare move, hoping whoever it was would leave without noticing me. The footsteps grew louder, stopping just a few feet away. I held my breath, barely daring to blink. Then I heard the sound of a box being opened and items being shuffled. My mind raced, wondering if I should confront them or stay hidden. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps started moving away, and the warehouse fell silent once more. I waited several minutes before summoning the courage to move. With trembling hands, I dialed 911 and whispered my situation to the dispatcher. Keeping my phone's flashlight pointed ahead, I made my way to the breaker room and flipped the power back on. The sudden return of light was both blinding and relieving. When the police arrived, we searched the warehouse together. All we found were muddy footprints leading from the back door to the shelves and out again. It seemed the intruder had slipped in while I was outside and had taken some expensive tools and equipment. Thankfully, they hadn't discovered me hiding just a few feet away. In the aftermath,
I realized how lucky I'd been. The police assured me they'd increase patrols in the area, but the incident left me shaken. From that night on, I made sure to lock the doors behind me whenever I stepped out, no matter how brief the errand. The memory of those footsteps in the dark and the near miss of a confrontation with a potentially dangerous intruder was something I wouldn't soon forget.